Ah, they finally brought Stryker back. An episode of this caliber feels like a total breath of fresh air after the last one. This episode was the most enjoyable of the season, and hell, the entire show, really. Seriously, I have very few complaints about this one. Any episode that doesn't make me hate Luna moves up an automatic 1.5 places due to the sheer difficulty of that task. Almost everything here was at the top of its game, from the dialogue to the plot to the visuals to the characterization. And now I'm going to explain why those things are so good in the detailed analytical way that I'm sure you came for. The plot of this episode is pretty standard. Stolas gets kidnapped by Stryker to be tortured and executed as ordered by Stella, and Moxie and Millie have to go get him. Meanwhile, Blitz goes to the sloth ring to get Luna her Helby's shot. While both of those things are happening, Stella is hanging out with her brother, Andrilpheus. He convinces her to tell Stryker not to kill Stolas, which is interesting, but more on that later. After receiving that information, Stryker is willing to obey, but not before severely fucking up Stolas. But before he can do that, M&M arrive, and an epic fight scene happens between them and Stryker. During that sequence, the episode cuts to Luna trashing Blitz and the doctor while they're trying to give her a shot. All that ends with Stryker getting crushed under a statue, and Luna getting the shot. M&M then takes Stolas, who's now in critical condition, to the same hospital that Blitz and Luna are at. Finally, as usual for a Stolas episode, there's some further development surrounding Blitz and Stolas' relationship. There's a lot to talk about surrounding that, so I'll go more into depth in that part later. Outside the Blitz and Stolas stuff, there's a myriad of character development around the other characters too, which makes sense. For most of the episode, it's not nearly as in your face, more of a sprinkling, but then the end ratchets that part up to an 11. I know that plot synopsis seem kind of short, but this episode really does require a more intensive breakdown by section. So let's get right into it. So the episode opens with Andrilpheus organizing Stella and Stolas' divorce, which is interrupted by Stryker kidnapping Stolas and binding him with blessed ropes, which apparently fall into the same class as the rifle from episode 5. They're shown to have the power to completely restrain Stolas, disabling his ability to use telekinesis, transform shape to escape, or use his Medusa stare. This is showing us more of these objects' capabilities, like that the blessed quality can be given to things other than weapons, and that the blessed weapons themselves can be destroyed by non-blessed weapons. Despite the ropes, Stolas manages to call Blitz and inform him of his predicament. Blitz doesn't really want to help right now due to him taking Luna to her quinquennial shot appointment, but Stryker seizes the phone and speaks just threateningly enough to convince Blitz to abandon his mission in favor of the rescue. But then M&M offered to do it instead, and Blitz agrees, so they split up after arriving at the hospital. Strangely enough, they decide to follow the less interesting B story with Blitz and Luna immediately following the split. I kind of think that they should have cut to this a bit later, for the simple reason that the M&M and Stryker stuff is more interesting. But the A and B stories are both strong, so this is a pretty minor complaint. Anyways, we get to see what the residents of the Sloth Ring, which is introduced in this very episode, are like. Based on how this receptionist is characterized, they seem to be these idiotic, slow, tired-looking creatures, which makes total sense for the Sloth Ring. Also, this line was hilarious.
The Helby's shot, you f***ing really can't say that word anymore.
I'll admit, it's kind of out of character for a character as openly vulgar as Blitz, but it also seems like the team is trying to work with what they can and can't say on YouTube in 2023. So massive props for working around restrictions in a way that doesn't detract from anything else too much. It is actually pretty funny. We also get a tiny piece of characterization for Blitz, when this receptionist keeps saying the silent O in his name, and it's visibly a trigger for him. It's showing us how strong his apprehension for his past is, a past that we know very little about thus far. All we know is that something very bad happened between Blitz and Fizz, and possibly between him and his own family. Whatever happened caused him to completely abandon his old life and blaze his own trail. That had to have been a pretty impactful event, so it's unsurprising that it's a trigger for Blitz, who's not the most stable guy to begin with. It's nice to see that the writers are keeping their characters consistent across the episodes, which really makes this universe feel more connected. After checking in, Blitz has to interact with this very Karen-esque woman, and this sequence is just great. Because let's be honest, this is how all of us want to speak to these kinds of people in the real world. Hearing Blitz's bag of insults and lack of filter unleashed upon this lady feels very cathartic. So following this, we cut to a montage of Stryker riding to his lair across a desert, a mineshaft, and a bunch of other western scenery. All the while an It mariachi band sings his theme song, which is alright. I'm sure you know by now that I'm pretty apathetic towards Helluva Boss songs, and this one is in line with that view. Ditto for the other two towards the end of the episode. Stryker's theme is still the best of the three, though. I'd honestly say that I wouldn't skip this one upon rewatching, but that's more because of the visuals, and the honestly pretty funny joke at the end where he yells at them than the actual song. So following that little montage, Blitz finally gets called in for Luna's shot. The episode then cuts to what M&M are doing, which is stopping for gas and asking the locals if they've seen Stryker. Millie goes off to ask, and Moxie fights a biker gang. This scene marks a transition into the middle portion of the episode. And no, crazy that we're here already. This episode is quite a bit shorter than the last two have been. So this scene with M&M is incredibly short, only lasting about a minute, but it's actually one of my favorite moments in the entire episode because it addresses my biggest concern with the last episode. In this scene, they finally allow Moxie to be not helplessly stepped on. He tears these bikers apart after a short struggle featuring the inventive fight choreography we'd expect from a character with Moxie's strengths. This just makes me so happy because it's showing clear improvement in an area that the show has been utterly failing at lately. This trend even continues throughout most of the episode with the fight with Stryker later. So moving forward, Millie gets the directions to Strykers from the mariachi, and off they go. After much waiting, the episode then cuts to the A story of Stryker and Stolas. Stryker is in his lair getting ready to torture Stolas, which Stolas immediately figures out was ordered by his wife. I guess that episode 5 cliffhanger isn't a secret anymore. We then get a little bit of characterization for Stryker. He says a couple lines that imply that his hatred for Hell's royalty came from them taking something from him in his past, most likely people he cared about. I can't wait to see that built upon in the future. This surge of hatred, most likely stemming from this recollection, makes Stryker viciously begin his torture of Stolas. Stolas fights back and points out his hypocrisy, which is that Stryker is currently on the payroll of his wife, another royal, despite his hatred. He also fights back in the form of giving smartass responses to Stryker's torture, which pisses off Stryker more. Despite how crass it all is, I think that this is actually some pretty decent characterization for Stolas. After getting stabbed the first time, Stolas gave a very real pained reaction, but then realized that that was giving Stryker exactly the satisfaction he wanted. So he immediately begins countering that after the next stab by not showing pain and responding in a smartass way. This is a very nice show-don't-tell way of informing the audience that Stolas is actually pretty smart and isn't the dumb ditzy royal. Nice job by the writers for integrating this. The episode then cuts back to Blitz and Luna for a second, and kicks off the start of a battle between Luna and Blitz and the Doctor. This is a pretty quick cut, and the action doesn't really kick into high gear in the side story until the fighting in the main story starts. The next scene we see is the only cut to Stella and Andriolphus in the entire episode. Andriolphus asks Stella if she ordered the hit out on Stolas, which she freely admits to. Andriolphus then questions her decision, saying that if Stolas dies, all his stuff gets passed on to Octavia instead of her. He also mentions Stolas' legions again, bringing the foreshadow counter on that too. I can't wait to see that in a future episode. I'm betting that it'll make its appearance in a finale of sorts, either a season 1 or the show 1. So Stella indirectly says that she doesn't really care, and Andriolphus just puts a little more pressure on her until she just says, "What do you think I should do?" He then says he doesn't really know, but suggests leaving Stolas alive so they still have options. Somehow that works and Stella accepts the idea. And I think this is probably the point where I should talk about what I think of Andriolphus. I've heard a few viewers throwing around the idea that Andriolphus got Stella to wait because he didn't want Octavia to be unexpectedly burdened with all of Stolas' responsibilities. But I think that's giving him a little too much credit. I personally think that he wants to get something out of Stolas' death, and, as he said, wants to leave him alive so his options are open. I know that's a pretty bold assumption to make based on what little we know about this character thus far, but to me, he seems just as selfish and elitist as the rest of the Goetias. He also strikes me as a bit creepy and incestuous given the way he speaks to his sister. After the agreement, we cut back to Stryker and Stolas, and enter what I would describe as the ending portion of the episode. So Stolas gets thrown to the ground, and we can now visibly see that he's a bit worse for wear from Stryker's continued off-screen torture. Stryker then mentions Octavia, which, as he puts it, strikes a nerve with Stolas. Stolas threatens to destroy Stryker if he messes with his daughter, as one would expect, but Stryker doesn't really care. Stryker raises his knife to finally finish the job, but that's when he gets the call from Stella to spare Stolas. He begrudgingly complies, but still decides to torture the shit out of Stolas before giving him back. But before he can do that, M&M show up and save Stolas' feathery skin, and okay, who came up with this gag? That's hilarious. After the IMP van is done tumbling downhill, Moxie opens the door and begins shooting out it, kicking off yet another epic, iconic Helluva boss fight scene. Well, actually we get 2 fight scenes, because the episode keeps cutting between Blitz and the Doctor trying to give Luna her shot during the Stryker fight. I actually think that these cuts are paced just about right, and the 2 fights don't really feel like they're stumbling over each other, so no complaints there. What isn't paced correctly is some of the Stryker fight. A lot of this action, especially this scene right here, is moving way too fast in my opinion. Like, even faster than the already extremely quick pace of the fight from the last episode. I remember popular Helluva Boss reviewer Random Game Critic complaining about the speed of the fight in the last episode being too quick, and I was kinda like, psst, who cares? It isn't even really that fast. But I think now I get what he means. Both of these fights are extremely fast-paced, and upon rewatch, I kinda wish they were slowed down just a little bit. I think X's and O's got it just about right, maybe a little slower than that, but definitely slower than this. Now let's talk about the other component of this fight, the 2 original tracks that play in the background. So the one to kick it all off is this badass sounding rock country kind of song, perfect for a Stryker fight taking place in the Old West theme raftering. However, most fights have badass music like this playing in the background because they heighten the energy of the fight. Think Freebird playing over the Kingsman Church fight. However, Helluva Boss decides to subvert this convention as a joke by having this grating pop song play in the background instead, after only a few moments of the other song. Now, this would be fine, but I think it plays for just a little too long and starts to get on my nerves after a pretty short amount of time. I honestly think that they should have just had some other piece of debris just destroy the whole radio after the 2 songs play for a roughly equal amount of time. Credit where credit is due that they do turn off this garbage when both fights get serious and start playing perilous music instead. So Millie temporarily gets taken out of the fight, and Stryker is about to beat the shit out of Moxie, but before that can happen, the B story concludes, with Luna finally getting her shot. I think it's really beneficial for the story that they ended this when they did, so that way they didn't have to cut to this far less serious part of the story during the climax of the other very serious fight. So Stryker is about to finish Moxie off via strangulation, like he did in episode 5, but much like Stolas, Stryker uses horniness as a distraction, which allows him to get the upper hand. Millie then frees herself and comes in for the assist, crushing Stryker under a statue of himself. If you pay attention to one of the first things Stolas says to Stryker, you'll realize that Stryker's defeat was actually kind of foreshadowed.
I'm just impressed you seem to want to suck your own this badly.
Now, I think they're trying to imply that Stryker dies here, with this bandana piece being here after he gets crushed. I highly doubt that's true, though, seeing as Stryker's a fan favorite and is the only reoccurring formidable enemy that the IMP has. But then again, if you go back and watch the trailer, the only scenes containing Stryker are only from this episode, meaning that we have no evidence of any future appearances. For now, I'm choosing to believe that Stryker lived. Now that Stryker's gone, M&M go over to check on Stolas, who's barely hanging on at this point. They get him to the hospital, which happens to be the same hospital Blitz and Luna are currently leaving. They meet up outside, and then a huge mob tramples Blitz to get to Stolas. Then they include this weird shot where Blitz gets a glimpse of Stolas' plumage on the stretcher, and I say weird because he just, doesn't have a response to it. He gets up and asks M&M what is happening, and then is surprised when they say it was Stolas, like he didn't just see him. You can't even say that he was confused about what he saw, because the expression that they give him looks more like realization than confusion, and then he just has a surprised realization again when Millie tells him it was Stolas. So I guess I'm saying that there really wasn't a purpose for this shot. However, the next line is very important. After Millie tells Blitz that Stolas got hurt, he says this.
Stolas got what? Ow.
He can get hurt?
You can't say that this voice conveys anything but complete surprise and, well, genuine concern for Stolas. I also think that there's a bit of horror in there, because it's dawning on him that Stolas can actually be vulnerable. There's a very real chance that Blitz thought that Stolas was in very little actual danger due to his Goetic status and powers, and just wanted rescuing for the sake of Blitz playing his hero. So the fact that that wasn't true, and that Stolas could have actually died, and he still called on Blitz to save him, that's probably all hitting him at once in this scene, and I think that his voice did a very nice job capturing that. Bravo to Brandon Rogers for the fine voice acting in this scene. I think that this very small line here is the biggest outward display of Blitz's repressed feelings for Stolas that we've seen so far. The relationship development continues in the next scene, which features Stolas in a hospital bed. So this scene starts throwing huge pieces of development at us right from the beginning. We immediately see Blitz and Stolas' texting history, which references past episodes and gives us more insights into the characters' thoughts on the events of those episodes. First off, Stolas' replies are long and involved, while Blitz's are short and to the point, usually only a couple words at most. I think that this shows us the more parasocial aspect of their relationship, how Blitz acts more outwardly apathetic to Stolas, while Stolas is the exact opposite of that. The first set of texts is about the events immediately succeeding Ozzy's, which is actually giving us more details about a part of this relationship that we've already seen. Actually, it's the most recent part. The last new information that we got regarding this relationship was in Season 2, Episode 1, with the song Owl in a Cage. I interpret that song as Stolas realizing how one-sided his relationship with Blitz actually is, and how sad that makes him. That song and these texts chronologically coincide, which makes total sense to me. In these texts, we can see that Stolas thinks he somehow wronged Blitz, which makes sense given how aggressive Blitz was being that night. Blitz shrugs it off as nothing, as to be expected, and Stolas says that he's glad that it's not a problem. The next set of texts talks about the events of seeing stars, and interestingly, Stolas actually gives Blitz the option to not come to visit him with the book. I think that this is him easing up a bit on the overt sexuality, in an attempt to make Blitz feel a little less patronized in hopes that it'll make him open himself up to Stolas a little bit more. It may also be emblematic of the fact that Stolas, in reality, really just craves a good relationship with somebody. This is further reinforced in the next set of texts, when Stolas once again gives him the opportunity not to come, or to come but to skip the bedroom. He does it a third time, saying that he just wants to catch up with Blitz when they see each other again. Like Blitz's moment of genuine concern, this is very telling, since, to my knowledge, this is the first time in the show that we've seen Stolas turn off the horny and actually just want to see someone because he enjoys their company and wants a good relationship. Thus far, all of Stolas' texts have been met with apathy from Blitz, until we see the one that he just sent in this episode, the one that makes Stolas pick up his phone in the first place. He simply tells Stolas to get better soon. This is the first initiation of a conversation by Blitz out of all the texts that we see, and it seems to be actually genuine. I know it may seem like a very small gesture, but for somebody who internalizes any sort of affection whatsoever, as much as Blitz does, this is huge. However, it doesn't last, as Stolas' very genuine reply and request for a visit is ignored. We see that Stolas gave a smile at the initial text, as this is one of the few times that Blitz has been genuine, but it slowly fades into disappointment. Now, there are a million different ways to interpret this, but I think that this is Stolas realizing that Blitz does harbor actual genuine feelings of affection for him, but will likely never show them in a capacity that will allow for the actually good and healthy relationship that Stolas wants to have with him. There's a reason that this episode ended with a dying plant. This relationship will die if Blitz can't contribute anything genuine to it. And on that very heavy note, The episode ends. This episode of Helluva Boss was damn near perfect. Seriously, I have almost no notes. The only bad thing about this episode was a couple problems with the fight scenes, but that's about it. Oh yeah, and the name sucks. You couldn't think of anything better than Western Energy? What does that even mean? Come on guys, it's a dumb thing to mess up on. Anyways, I remember a while ago I predicted that Helluva Boss Season 2 would manage to produce a perfect 10 of an episode, and I think that this episode comes about as close to that achievement as one can get. Dare I say it, but I think this episode is my new favorite in the entire show. 9.5 out of 10 stars. After the rather disappointing preceding episode, I can't tell you how good it feels to watch, review, and label this episode a masterpiece. Enormous props to anyone and everyone involved in this project. You are all making content that is better than almost anything to come out of Hollywood in the last 5 years. Thank you for keeping creativity and brilliance alive. On that exceptional note, that's all I have to say for this one. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video around. Bye.